We had one earlier in the week from Lisa Herod, Scenario Girl in Australia, and she said, what is the difference between inclusive design and accessibility?
It's a good question. Okay, so if I can actually put that one to Leonie to start off with, if that's okay. Leonie, what's your opinion on that one?
I think inclusive design is a phrase I've heard a lot recently, and I'm glad that it's kind of re-emerged as a kind of buzzword, if you can say that at the moment. It's been around for a long time in one form or another, and it's very much part of our philosophy at the Mensa and humanising technology. So I don't think there's a difference. I think there's a connection. I think, as I said, accessibility is part of inclusive design. Inclusive design is pretty much what it says on the tin. It's about designing something that's inclusive, that everybody can use, everybody can access, or as many as people as we can physically arrange. And accessibility is just one part of the toolkit of doing that. And the further we get away from thinking about that in isolation, the happier I'll be, to be honest. We don't think about whether we're going to use HTML or CSS to build the website. It's just the way it's done. And the fact that HTML, that CSS, that creative design is accessible, we shouldn't really even be thinking about it. It should just be the done deal. It should be just part of it. So for me, it's a conversation that's been a long time coming, and I'm really glad it's out there again. But there's a connection between the two, not a difference.
Fantastic. Does anybody else on the panel have anything to add to that?
Let's be controversial. I don't care. Don't care what you call it. I've been in design for all, universal usability. I've been in conferences on all of these things. What I care about is what you do. I don't care what you call it. Actually, for me, I worked in educational websites around about 2005, 2007. Actually, a lot of the language around inclusive design is very similar to what's happening in schools. So if you like, you had sort of like special schools where people were kind of hidden away, and then inclusion sort of like brought everyone together. And if you like, my perspective on some of these things is that inclusion is really cool and is a great idea. But people can get completely carried away in thinking that they can do one thing that's going to work for absolutely everybody. And my experiences of actually talking to a lot of the teachers who had real expertise in how to help children with a particular disability learn, once everything went inclusive, a lot of that expertise, kind of drained away. So, if you go into my SlideShare space, you'll find me wittering on about beyond inclusion and reverse inclusion since about 2005. Because for me, the thing that I kind of love the idea of is designing for individuals. And saying, you know what, I'm going to treat you as if you're the only person in the world who I really care about. And I'm going to see if we can do that for everybody. And we had loads of discussions when we were doing 8878 around this kind of terminologies and things. And for me, everybody wants the thing that works for them. And so that should be the aim.
Absolutely agree. Okay. Does anybody in here have a question for anyone on the panel at all? Fabian?
Actually, I do. We talk a lot about the web. I'm wondering whether that's kind of similar effort for TV. Let's say, I have a TV, you have a menu to operate, and if you don't see it, if there anything you can do it, you need to ask someone else for help.
I'm going to put that one to Judith, because I know that you've been doing some work about
I have, yes. Well, there is a lot of work going on about making TV more accessible. I think in terms of screen readers, I think there's still challenges that they're working on, so perhaps Leonie could expand on that. But more recently, earlier this year, I was doing some research for the BBC on how to improve reading on television in terms of what is the best font to use and what size it should be. And they're actually ramping up the fonts on television now because they've discovered, technology's moved on a lot and we've got bigger televisions, and so we need to move on. So people are working in these domains. I think some of the issues with television, it was Project Canvas and user review, and everything went a little bit slower than it should have done. But the concept behind that is you would have a set-top box and you could access it with your own device, so it would be your mobile phone or your laptop, and I think that's what they're still striving towards, but say things are going a bit slower. Have you got an update on that, Leonie? Or
from a sort of screen reader
yeah,
perspective, I mean,
TVs.
we're kind of sort of teetering on the brink a little bit. There are devices like the Sky Talker from Sky, specific set-top boxes that are designed, as one from Ocean Blue, that will talk to you and kind of give you access to some or all of the kind of electronic program guides. We're also kind of seeing a lot of people, admittedly amongst the more kind of technically savvy, if you like, having sort of set-top boxes that are kind of effectively computers, and so with kind of screen readers in the kind of original sense of the word, attached to those. So I think we're kind of poised on a bit of a step, and I think over the next few years we're going to see a lot more stuff talking to us, because a lot of stuff is kind of starting to talk to everybody. It's not just us screen reader users.
Actually, there's a good thing about UView. Gareth Williams at the BBC I put him onto UView to try and create a platform that actually would be accessible from day one. So, because the problem with a lot of this stuff is that things change really, really slowly in the TV industry, and most set-top boxes are really, really poor computers. And if you think about what we have to be thankful to the WAI for, what they did was, people talk about WCAG a lot, but they don't really think about ATAG and UAAG. So the other things that, if you like, enable me as a content producer to have a way of communicating with an assistive technology. So if you like, a lot of the stuff that W3C and Microsoft did, maybe at the start of the 90s, that is the sort of stuff that we're trying to get into UView now. So the idea was, rather than, if you like, having to have people buy a separate box for it, as Judith was saying, it was putting an API there so that you could expose the stuff there, and people could actually do innovation around it. If you talk to Microsoft about assistive technologies, they always talk about ecosystems, and they want people to invent new technologies which are going to make it better. And the way they enable that to happen is by, if you like, surfacing information. So, sorry, that gets very, very techie for a while. But the really cool thing is that because we were doing this, some really amazing mainstream stuff happened. So because we were trying to enable you to, say, use your iPhone with VoiceOver on it to do now and next to control your set-top box, so actually you've already got a speaking remote control, people started saying, oh no, that's cool. That's like 2 screens to control a TV. Wouldn't it be great to use that API to do all sorts of things that aren't anything to do with disabled people? Yeah. Actually, I'm tweeting whilst I'm watching the TV. With your API, I can now actually link my iPad with the TV up. So if you like, there is that's the latest in a long history of things that have been designed specifically for disabled people, but have broken out into the mainstream, the typewriter, all sorts of things.
I think it's fantastic. Okay, so Steve, did I see you had your hand up there for a question?
Yes, he was waving it around.
You were waving it around. Steve?
Yeah, it's a question to the panel, because I don't know who would be best placed to actually answer it, but we've talked about, obviously, access mediums being mobiles, being computers, or at least inferred that's the access mediums of choice. Where does it leave the games designers and the games consoles producers here, the Sonys, the Microsofts, the Nintendos of this world, with regards to, and there's 2 questions in this one, if that makes any sort of sense.
Don't be greedy.
So it's a double-ended question. Is firstly the devices that they use to access, because obviously all of these games consoles can access the web. Is where does that leave them from a legal point of view, and also how considering the number of people that we talked about with disabilities or access difficulties to entertainment in this particular case, game consoles. I bet there's not 20% of games out there that are designed for people with access difficulties in mind. So, what do you think, or can anybody tell me where the Sonys, the Microsofts, the Nintendos of this world are positioned at this moment in time? It's a big market.
Leonie, what about you? Do you have any ideas what's going on?
I know that there's a touch on this in BS 8878, where it sort of puts things into the context of saying that accessibility can't be applied in all contexts and all circumstances. You know, it's going to be very difficult to make a first-person shoot 'em up accessible to somebody who can't see the screen, no matter how hard you try. You know, so I think there is that sort of context that there has to be a degree of practicality in that answer somewhere. There is a thriving accessible games industry, and I can kind of only speak from a blind person's point of view. There is a version of Doom, for example, for those of you who were around maybe 10 years ago. You know, you can play. It's entirely audio-based. I have no idea how people do it, but it's there. Games like Papa Sangre, iPad and iPhone. You know, actually it's kind of a mainstream game, but there are no visuals to it at all. You play it entirely by audio, but it's so there are kind of industries coming up about accessible gaming. There was also a case in America, I think last year, maybe a little longer ago actually, where I think a blind person attempted to take Sony, I think, to court precisely for kind of that situation, and I don't think the whole thing got very far, it has to be said.
I just
was
wondered
obviously different to ours, but
the real question was, has BS the likes of me, because I've not read through the fine print, I'll be honest, and is it actually addressing the situation?
Yeah, I mean, so my history is, I say, the educational project I work with was educational games. I'm going to throw out some things that you can Google. Google Special Effect. They're a UK organisation that do a lot about accessible games. If you Google the IGDA Special Interest Group on Accessibility, I went all the way to San Jose in 2005 to meet with the guys. The original guys who did sort of like audio games and things like that.
And the other thing that you can do is you can pick Jonathan's brains over some beer. Because I'm actually going to ask a question of Richard. What I'm wondering, Richard, is that I know that you're here not as an accessibility person per se, but as a corporate representative.
Yep.
What do you think that the community can do to get more corporates doing inclusive design the way that Vodafone is? What is going to convince them, do you think?
Gosh, good question. Well, like in anything consumer-oriented, people need to vote with their feet.
Mm-hmm.
If a product is not easy to use, if it's not helping the people they know that are accessible, don't buy the product. I'll be the first to say, I want our products to be good, and people should buy them if they're good. But if they're not, if they don't serve the need of people with glasses or even more extreme accessibility needs, just don't buy the product. There's power in consumer groups to do that.
Do you think that the corporates are actually listening to the social media that's going on, sort of the chatter that's going on out there as well, or not?
Absolutely. I mean, we certainly have a very big program now of socializing everything that we do. All our websites now are getting powered up with lithium social networking backends, and more as we try to push our self-care back on people, the flow is going two ways, and we're hearing more and more about what works for us and what doesn't work for our customers. So we have no choice but to listen, because we're using that platform, and when it's open there and people are using it, then we're getting that flood of information coming back.
Fantastic, thank you. Any other questions? Oh, no, Kat. Dave.
Yeah, I've got a question. When you go into a store, quite often they have products on display. You can't actually use them, they have batteries in or things like that. Is it quite hard to sell accessibility to people in a shop? Or, even if you think of internet shopping as well, when you can't actually use a product?
I mean, certainly from a Vodafone store, everything that's on display is not working. All you have to do, gosh, this is a real terrible sales pitch. All you have to do is just ask the guy behind the counter, and he'll bring out, a working model. My view on usability in general has always been that, it's a part of the sales process. When I used to work at Bose, I run the usability team at Bose, a big part of that, people would go into the shop and there was a theatre there, and they got to use and experience the product. And if you pick up a remote and you can't at least get some impression of how you might use the product, same with a phone, then immediately the sale is either lost or reduced. So, usability has to be a part of the selling process, and by extension, accessibility has to be in that process as well. Obviously, there's phones that are designed specifically, larger buttons, larger screens for people, with accessibility needs, and we should train our sales guys to take advantage of that. But I agree, you've got to be able to use the product to do it. So just go and ask the guys behind the counter, and they'll bring out a working phone, whatever you need.